welcome to the Talking HealthTech podcast. My name is Peter Birch. Today on the show, I'm joined by Josh Ayscough, Utiliti Group Partner. G'day, Josh. How you going?
Really well, Pete. How are you?
I'm super great. It's great to chat with you as always. First time on the podcast. So plenty of conversations happening in the THD Plus community and just out and about at things. And I know you've been out and about across the world at different bits and pieces and bring a really eclectic mix of experiences to health tech and building stuff and innovation, but investing in particular too. So super excited to have a chat on the pod. But for those unfamiliar with yourself, Josh, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about you, what you do, and maybe your background. That's super helpful too. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, perfect, Pete. So I grew up in the Hunter. I was doing psychology first and then found my way into social services and some health tech that centered around social services. So allied health, meal delivery for people with disabilities through the NDIS. And met some really great investors in that process that were supporting that business, and then had the opportunity to join the men's health platform called Mosh early days as that whole wave was riding out, and got to see Mosh go through a really big growth journey and adoption of digital health kind of during and post-COVID, building digital health products there for telepharmacy and telemedicine. That was a really interesting look at the way the health tech organizations and sector operated, and then had the opportunity to go on to the investor side. So joined Jason, who was the investor in my previous two businesses, and then go in and have a look at health and med tech, which is my main focus now.
Yeah, interesting. And so Utiliti Group, is that the focus for the group investing? Like what stage, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we'll do kind of seed through Series A investing. We have kind of two main focuses. One, we do a lot of tech and tech services, data, cloud. How is information stored and moved between places? And then the other mandate, which is my focus, is a broad view of health and med tech. So there's a deep tech and devices that we won't go to, but anything that's consumer native care, digital products, enterprise health tech, the stuff that will make administration better for better patient experiences or patient touching, will go and look to support.
Interesting. And mostly Australian organisations?
Yeah, so mostly Australian organisations. We're based in Sydney, but we've got a global mandate, so we look all over the world. We look at things in Singapore and Asia, and then most recently in the US and the UK.
I want to dive into that in a little bit, but I guess a lot of the conversation, even from my own experience of working in healthcare technology businesses, it sometimes feels like the day to day of the doing, of the building of the technology. There's such a focus on let's build a really nice product or something that has a really interesting pricing or business model, or maybe something that's like super good for clinicians and they're just going to love it. And there's kind of every other focus in between when you're building technology. But in the end, to build that actual piece of technology, you're going to need money from somewhere. And then I've been in a lot of those conversations where you've been in the bunker and you've been building the health tech solution, and then you go to an investor and you say, look at this wonderful thing. And then, there's kind of these left field questions that come in, a bit like, well, this investor just doesn't get it, or like, they don't understand the industry or what we're actually doing and all of that. But I'd love to get your take on how you approach, investment opportunities in health tech, and what is important, and maybe what that process is, because I think that's going to be super helpful to anyone building healthcare technology solutions in Australia.
Yeah, I think, health tech is unique in the way that the businesses operate. You can't go as far in health tech as what other sectors can in terms of smoke and mirrors or MVP products, because, you do need something that is operational and is going to work. I think as when I look at the healthcare investments, we're looking first at the founder market or founder product fit. So who is this person? Do they have a deep understanding of what they're building? And that is a nice part about the health tech and healthcare services, is we've got a lot of people that are solving their own problems and have come out of the healthcare system and seen a challenge and look to solve it. And then the next is the deep understanding of the patient benefit or the benefit that the healthcare sector is going to get. It's probably the main question that I find myself asking first in pitches from founders, because it's an area that is often missed. You see founders often dive into, here's my technology and why it's so great. Here are some really interesting commercial components about why this is a good investment. And that's important, but I go looking first for, what is the great need? Why is the healthcare sector, and why is myself or someone in my family or someone in my network going to be much better off for your technology existing? Because, as an investor, we're trained a lot to go through the black and white and the financial elements, but you like being connected to the human element of health. If you like healthcare investing, you've got to kind of make that bridge and connection. And then, what's the health outcome that you're going to solve? What is going to be fundamentally different about the healthcare sector or people's health as a result of your technology existing? So if you can sell an investor and you can sell me that the world's going to be a better place for your platform, then I'm asking the question as to, well, how are you going to get there, and how much is it going to cost to get there?
Mm, mm. You mentioned the founder, the like, what's this? How does this founder operate, or who is this person? Why is this problem why are they the right person to solve this problem? And even, is the problem clear in the first place? In healthcare, sometimes those founders are clinical and sometimes they're not. Do you have a preference on whether someone is clinical or not?
No, there's no preference. I think some of the best businesses we've seen have the combination of both. Because, if you're a clinical founder, you're going to have a really deep understanding of the problem and the solution, but it's going to be limited by that one person's experience or their own views. The non-clinical founder, they need to have that clinical person somewhere, whether it's an advisory board member or an early team member, to kind of show that you go through and you understand the sector. Health is very insular. I think everyone who works in health knows that people kind of move between the sector, and for all the reasons that founders often find investors don't understand, is you kind of get health or you don't. And so as investors, even if you don't fully understand healthcare, you can get sold on the financial benefits or, the technology and what's possible for it. But, if you have those combination of a technical versus a medical founder, you can get a long way early stage.
I feel like this is an important question for 2025. Do you need the domain to have .ai at the end of it?
No, but I mean, you do have to have some idea and strategy around what you're going to do with AI and why. I think if there was a founder going through and creating a pitch deck in the health tech space right now, I would certainly be including one slide that is, here is our view about AI. Even if your choice is to not use it or make it part of your product, just an articulation as to why. Certainly out of the US trip I've just come from, there are very few investors in the US that are not looking for AI somewhere in that solution, or at least an articulation as to how it's going to fit internal, external, feature, not feature. It has to be somewhere.
Yeah. Why is that, though? I mean, I've got my own assumptions and I could probably provide an answer, but I'd love to get your take on why that is important to include at some point in the deck.
I think, AI is at the top of everyone's mind, and it's right now, there's a lot of hype around AI. It has the potential, and, in isolated cases, it is doing really, really good things. But because of the media attention it gets and because of the way that organizations are speaking about it, my experience in looking at businesses that are using AI, I don't think anyone is hugely winning in the AI space or using it that effectively. But everyone's talking about it really positively, and no one wants to get caught bad mouthing AI. So they just talk about the wins. And so then everyone kind of gets on the bandwagon and they go running with it, which is why we don't mandate or want to see every single business be .ai or have to be AI led. We just want to know that you're considering this as a wave, in the same way that 10 years ago, I think you really needed to consider, what is the digital component to your product? How is this going to move from bricks and mortar into an increasingly digital or internet-based world? And, they were the decks that we had 10 years ago. And now that same process is happening for AI, at least in healthcare.
Yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I guess like any advice you would get for the last 50 years would be ensure that your positioning is incorporating, all the internal and external and macro environmental kind of elements. And that's a very obvious one that's front of mind across the sector. So that seems obvious now you say it. Hey, you mentioned this US trip. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. What happened there?
So I traveled over to the US for Health US. Um, Really great and interesting conference. I want, one of the largest in the world, one in the US, one in Europe. I went over looking to see the innovations that are coming out of the US. I find from an Australian perspective, we punch well above our weight in terms of, startups and how we grow digital health within Australia. But for those of us that are working in here, it's a highly regulated environment. It's very, very difficult to push the boundaries too far and commercialize at the same time. So businesses are building within the guardrails that exist, and that makes perfect sense. No point building a digital product that you then can't take to market because every regulator wants to push back at you. The US, while a much more complex environment and market, doesn't have those same guardrails. It's a little bit more the Wild West in over there. And so it breeds some really interesting innovations, some of which that are applicable to come back to Australia, and some of which create space for Australian businesses to go over there if they choose to, and kind of grow through the US market.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And sometimes I find those it's not just about what's happening in the US, but you often come across a lot of other companies from around the world that are looking at that. But that can then open up those conversations with close ties to, because you've got ties into the UK as well, or at least looking at what's happening there too. So there's probably some, at least not parallels, but things to compare how each of the regions operate.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about health, is that it's inherently global. Their healthcare challenges or goals and the healthcare systems, the payments and how money moves in the systems do vary greatly across the world, but our underpinning physiological nature, and then how we treat healthcare conditions now in 2025 doesn't vary that much. So a hospital environment within Poland has similarities to one in Australia, to one in the US, to one in the UK. Again, how it's funded varies, but that's a really nice thing. And you can build global day one as a healthcare company.
Yeah. One thing I noticed too is that, or I'm always interested in looking at a health tech company to work out how much they're looking to build as kind of native or in-house or vertically integrate into their whole solution versus how much they're kind of connecting in with the whole ecosystem. And I feel like that's a forever sliding scale of like, are you just an interface over the top of something else versus is your solution like super unique? Because we're in this environment that, at least in the hospital world, that there's some very large EMR providers that potentially could just build every product or feature, turn your product into a one small feature of their solution. And I guess if you're building a health tech solution, maybe I hear a lot of founders that are essentially creating something, and the long-term plan is to sell it up into something else or to roll it into something else. But then, because it can feel overwhelming to think, well, how are we going to compete with these giant players in building a solution? One answer might be, oh, we're nimble and we're different and maybe we think differently. But sometimes that's a little bit of a rose-colored glasses or not really understanding the full ecosystem. What's your take on how much you should build yourself versus connecting with other parts?
Yeah, I wish there was a really simple answer to that, because it's the ongoing challenge in healthcare and health tech. As you go through, I think in the early stages, you need to be able to build one thing that is uniquely yours and that is going to solve a core problem within the ecosystem. And then my view is that there needs to be a much greater focus on partnerships and connecting in with others. I think, out of the trip to the US and comparing that to the last couple of years of Australian health tech organizations, here in Australia, there seems to be a greater focus on going as far as you can yourself, trying to build more of your products. And then once you've reached a certain scale, going and finding partnerships that can accelerate. The US is almost the polar opposite of that. They're nailing one problem and solution within their platform, and then they're partnering with other organizations and other businesses that are at a similar stage to go in and show enough depth in a product and a solution to sell into the bigger enterprise, the healthcare systems, the payors in the US market, to be able to get in the door. It's a big competitive environment. And then on that basis, they're working out, well, what are we going to expand on again? So I think, if I was going through and I was in an early stage business, and for me, operating in the health tech space, I thought early days I had to pick a path. we're either an ecosystem play or we're going to own this whole stack ourselves. I actually think it's more like a zigzag that, you've got to find your first opportunity and nail that in your product. Then you should step out into the ecosystem and see who I can partner with and where that makes sense for the business. What I think that will do and what that would show me, and I saw in the US at the same time, is, okay, I can grow faster together. And if you want to go far, go together. And then equally, speaking to founders over in the US, that process of going out to the ecosystem identified the obvious gaps that came through of, I went out looking for partners in this space and I couldn't find any that did what I wanted them to do. So when I go back to building my own stack, that's the next thing I'm going to build. It's not guessing so much as just knowing that, okay, well, I went to the ecosystem, it wasn't there, so I'm going to build and expand from there.
For some reason, that reminded me that in a lot of my conversations with health tech vendors in New Zealand, bear with me for a moment, but a lot of those building solutions in New Zealand feel a bit like it's quite a small pool. Like there's a lot of really niche solutions that are being built that solve a particular problem and do it well for the New Zealand healthcare system. And then they look at, like, there's the total population of New Zealand is 5 million people, and that's it. And so then you can deduce down what the total addressable market is if you're just looking at operating in that country. But then they look to expand into other parts and go, well, do we even have the appetite or interest to scale out into the rest of the world? Because we're so often wired to think, well, what's next and how do we then 10x this thing and do all of this? But there are some really good solutions that can be profitable and from a founder's point of view, be successful and deliver on all those outcomes and why they got into healthcare in the first place. If they just do one thing really well for a particular cohort of people and just continue to stay competitive. So what's your take on, being small and the best versus really investing into continuing to grow?
Yeah, I think if you go through, again, the nice thing about healthcare is you do need to get aligned on, what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And, we should see most people in this space looking to deliver, usually a patient or an end person or a population outcome from their health tech. How far that can grow and expand depends on lots of factors. But if you start with the outcome you want to achieve, and you're working towards that, then how far you scale, whether you stay local and you only operate in your community or you become a global presence as a founder or a team member in that, you should feel good about what you're doing and invest accordingly. Then before you decide if you're going to take investment or you're going to go through that growth journey, you need to decide and see enough traction to think, okay, this is going to be applicable in other markets, because growth is really hard. Growing internationally is really hard. They're big investments. As investors, we love that challenge. That's where our model is built on founders that want to take their product and 10x it and 100x it and take it to the world. But not every product has that opportunity. Not every founder and team wants to do that process. So, having that purposeful conversation with yourself early stage is really important. As if global domination and 10xing or 100xing your solution isn't what you want to do for the next 20 to 25 years, then you can start smaller or aim a little bit more locally or nationally and go through. And Australia is a really interesting market for that because we're not as big as other parts of the world. We're bigger than New Zealand, but compared to the UK and the US and parts of Europe, we're quite small. We're we're a weird in-between size from a healthcare market perspective.
It does attract a lot of interest from other parts of the world too, to almost like demonstrate in Australia. Like Australia often becomes one of the first places to go, particularly for UK and maybe even US companies too, because they're like, oh, it's sort of similar to a health system, but it's different, and there's that size piece. It's we do see a lot of traction coming that way too. So yeah, it's a fun little challenge. One thing I notice when I'm talking to a lot of health tech founders and part of programs and things, often there's one main request I get, which is, can you introduce me to someone? And there's two types of people that they want introductions to. And that's a hospital CIO or a decision maker in a clinic, or an investor. And often my advice to them is like, well, giving you a warm introduction is probably only a small percentage of this problem to solve, because often when you get that opportunity and a chance to speak to a decision maker at a buyer level, or someone who's going to invest in your solution, you really need to be kind of crisp in your communication with them, because you don't often get regular chances. Like, they've got long memories. So if you've met with, and I'm curious to get your take on it, but if you've met with an investor as a health tech solution, you kind of burnt your opportunity a little bit, or you're kind of half-baked in a lot of your answers, and you think, oh, that's okay, I'll just have a meeting with them in 12 months and kind of give them an update on where things are at. Mentally in their head, they're kind of like, no, I've already discounted that solution because it didn't do X, Y, Z. So you kind of just don't get that second chance. But am I kind of am I thinking about it too broadly here? Or like, at what point should you be speaking to customers or investors when you think that, I am going to need to sell and scale, or I am going to need investment? Haven't got all the answers just yet, but it's just probably like, in my head, it makes sense to have those relationships and build those connections early. Like, when should people speak to you?
Yes, I think from an investment side, you do need to have that kind of pitch and your idea pretty crisp. And I think I've definitely had the experience of founders being introduced or getting the opportunity to meet with founders who probably didn't have that deck or that narrative fully worked out and understood, and left a lot of the critical questions answered. What are we going to achieve? Who is going to buy this? What is my entry point into buying this? And as an exec that was previously buying digital health solutions and partnering with organizations, what are you going to do for me? How much is it going to cost? And what is the return on investment? A lot of it is going to be forecasted or believed. If you're lucky enough to be at a scale that you have use cases and experience in the market and case studies that you can speak to, that always goes well, but we're not all afforded that luxury. And then, if you have that ready and you have confidence in that pitch and you've given it a few practice runs with friendly people, then you can come and put your best foot forward. I think the thing that I always encourage founders to remember if they're coming and speaking to investors is, we generally keep everything. We write notes on everything. This is the profession that we're in. You take it very seriously. So, if you think that I'm going to come in and have a conversation, I'm going to tell you that this is the way the business is going to run and this is where we're going to take it and this is what I'm going to achieve in the next 12 months, it has to be baked in your version of reality and what you believe you will do. Because in a lot of cases, because we are curious and we know that investment life cycles are long and businesses evolve, if you present well and you present confidently and you bring some value and you're a respectful founder, you got a high chance of getting a second meeting in 12 months time if you do the right thing. But 12 months is a long time. Founders often forget. We don't. And so if you said in 12 months, I'm going to have 10 customers and this much revenue and the platform's going to be here, they're likely to be the first things we're looking to see when you come back in. And if your second deck or your deck in 12 months time show a vastly different story without explaining it, then you'll lose us.
Yeah. That reminds me that I learned a valuable lesson at some point in my career, that especially in the capital raising process, because it's not a fast process. You start the conversation, you start saying, this is our trajectory for growth, and you've got all intentions to do that. But if you'll continue to have that conversation in 6 months' time, and you've been so focused on the investment process, because sometimes it feels like you need to just get out of the business to work on the business to be able to win this investor over, the last thing on your mind is like how we went last month. But that's going to be the first thing on your mind, right? Because it's almost like you've started the process. That's like the really critical time for you to deliver, in 6 months' time, because you're going to be looking back. You literally said, in our first discussion that it's going to point this direction upwards, what's happening there. So that feels pretty important to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was my experience operationally in businesses in the past. We had a long capital raise process that started to extend out because the business was doing quite well. So we were exceeding targets, and the investors just wanted to see, one more month of results, and if this project's going to land. And then as a result of focusing on the capital raise, things went the other direction, and it extended the process even more. And we were lucky to end up closing that deal, but others can't be. And that helps in 2025 and beyond. You do have an opportunity to be a solo founder. There's lots of AI and SaaS tools that can get people a lot further today than what you could get 5 years ago. But if you're in market, you do need to have the business continuing to tick over, and they're great things for a founder if you can get your team or yourself focused on the delivery. If you've got a conversation with me in October, and then you haven't heard from me, you can follow up first week of November and say, hey, Josh, we said we were going to do this, and we have.
Yes.
Investors love that sort of stuff, because we're asking ourselves, are we investing in, or are we managing idea risk? Do we believe in your idea and your concept, or are we investing or managing execution risk? Execution risk is much, much easier and quicker to see. We can't see you executing towards $1 billion company, because that's going to take, a decade or more. But if you're the type of founder that said, I'm going to do this, and you come back and say, I've done it, it gives a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I love that. What's your kind of often I think about what the interest might be from investors in healthcare innovation, and there is a trendy element of it where there's more of a consumer focus, and I guess that bleeds into things like, it's not even wellness, it's like longevity and health optimization and things like this, or the consumerization of healthcare, and events like Health HLTH. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, and in the US that's quite popular. What's your kind of take on directionally healthcare technology and this blend of improving processes and procedures within the business versus more and more consumer stuff? What's really interesting to you over the horizon of as digital health evolves, and what's going to be important?
Yeah, I think the long-term direction is going to be in this consumer native care. So, we've had a lot of the traditional healthcare processes. Very, very short term, there's lots of opportunity for digital transformation within traditional healthcare. So for the investments over the last 3 years on our side, and what I think will be core to the next kind of 2 to 3 years is the opportunity to digitize traditional healthcare. Other sectors have been through the digital transformation a lot more. We've seen, finance and banking go through a big digital transformation and put banking in people's pockets. It's a long process. Healthcare, for many reasons, is far behind that, and we're still going through the traditional healthcare digitization. So if you have something in that space, great. I believe kind of 2025, 2026 is going to be a big boom for consumer native care. We go through, and coming out of HLTH, we have retail experiences, grocery experiences, beauty and high level wellness experiences that you can all have on a smartphone, and accessibility of smartphones and those devices, speaking in people that operate in lots of jurisdictions out of the US. But if you go through that kind of socioeconomic status, people have smartphones. Like that is the device and thing that they've got. And I met with some people from both Apple and Samsung in the US when I was in San Francisco for a different conference. And they're investing heavily into how those devices are going to become the center of the consumer native care ecosystem. They're building functionality to connect in with wearables like an Aura Ring or the Whoop bands, building out what their phones are capable of doing in terms of scanning, and to go and create that ecosystem of a doctor in your pocket. And so, for me, I'm actively seeking those people that are looking at consumer native care, because it also solves part of the who pays question.
Yeah.
The next thing then for Australia needs to be, how does Medicare and other government funded systems catch up with consumer native or consumer tech because it's still rooted deeply in traditional healthcare in the funding models. But if I was going to sit and lobby for something today or partner with people to lobby, it would be for Medicare to go and pick a handful of consumer native care or digital health products to get a Medicare funding line so that people can go and have the personalized healthcare experience they need in the digital environment that they're expecting to have.
Mm. It's a challenge, isn't it? Because if I think about how much capacity there is in the ecosystem for lobbying to government around like what Medicare pays for, sometimes it's who's the loudest and who's got the most compelling argument there, whether that's the most impactful for the population overall or not. But there's so much of that focus has been on impact to clinicians, and there's primary care and what's happening there. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's like I don't even know at what point we shift that conversation more from just, how we actually deliver care. Like so much of the conversation around Medicare is just how we run GP clinics and how much they get funded. But I don't know at what point it's going to be like, whether the general population has capacity to manage their own healthcare themselves. Like there is people who are, afforded the luxury of being able to look at what their readiness score is on their Aura Ring in the morning and all of that kind of stuff. But there's the vast population that just don't have access. There's no GP. There hasn't been a GP in their town for 18 months because no one wants to work there. It's tough.
I think it's an exceptionally interesting and exciting time to be in and around healthcare as all of those things work out. My view and opinion is that I don't think people are wanting to be that involved in their healthcare. I think too much choice and too much control is difficult and overwhelming when health as part of our day-to-day life is somewhat of a background activity. We want good health. We want to do good things for our health, but that's an enabler of other things that bring us joy in life as people. And then when you lay that across to your healthcare professionals, there's a big incentive conflict. I understand if you're a founder in a health tech organization, it can be incredibly frustrating, as it is for me as an investor as well, because I meet with healthcare executives, I meet with healthcare practitioners who actually all believe and want to move to a more digital environment. It's more efficient for them. They can see the benefits of AI and collection of data and more preventative healthcare. But if a funding model doesn't support that, if the funding model supports traditional healthcare scenario, what am I going to do? I can't kind of work myself out of a job either if the incentives aren't in the right place. So we're going to have to work that out because other sectors are beginning to see that process. And then we're going to need some innovative organizations that take the consumer native care approach and try and work out where is the general population going to sit and how do we move to a more preventative healthcare scenario. It's kind of the funny and again frustrating thing as someone who's kind of focused their investee fund in healthcare is that in 2025 we have a pretty good idea of what we should do as people to stay healthy and happy, and pretty well regarded that preventative healthcare is the way to go. We've got a pretty good idea of what is going to cure a lot of illnesses. There's still a few things that we haven't worked out yet, but we know mostly what it means to be healthy and how to do it. But what we haven't worked out yet is who's going to pay for it. We haven't worked out yet is who's going to benefit from these solutions and what are their motivations. And then the really interesting part now, the deeper you get into it, is who's fighting against you or who's fighting with you in getting that outcome. And there's a lot of reasons in traditional healthcare that things should just stay the way they are. But the world's evolving, so health has to evolve with it.
This is why I love this industry. There's always those impossible economic problems to address, and they feel impossible. But then you get that little thin end of the wedge to kind of start to see some traction, and that's how through all of the small conversations and small wins, that's where we start to see progress. So there's Definitely need that pathway. But often if you get too deep in the weeds or go down a particular rabbit hole, it feels overwhelming and you're not really sure where to get back on track. So that's super helpful, at least for me anyway. Josh, as we start to round out the conversation, look, I know you're a busy guy generally, and I want to kind of optimize this, use this opportunity for you too. So if there were founders coming to meet with you about, investment into their solution, if there were doesn't have to be 3, but if there was 3 key things that they need to make sure they've really kind of nailed, or things you're looking for first, to make it the most useful conversation with you or any investor in health tech, what would your advice be that they should really nail down first?
I think my advice would be, nail down the future that you see. What is going to be different, and connect us into the health outcome that your solution is going to deliver. And that, if that's on the patient side, it's a little bit easier. If you're delivering a solution into the healthcare sector that makes, clinicians more efficient or reduces their administration, you can still, give a solution that, a nurse spends less time in admin, or it costs less to deliver care, and that's the end goal. So, nail down that point early so that you ultimately find the coalition of the willing. So, your point earlier, it is banging your head against a wall. So you have to go into that journey with partners and staff and investors that believe in the future that you believe in. Next, show why you're the person to solve that problem, and why you see that future, and how then your solution and you together, because it's always the solution and the founder together that we look at most, is going to be able to knock down that wall and go through. And the last would be, it's not quite the risk mitigation component, but as part of that, demonstrate that you understand the challenges that are ahead of you and that you've considered them. You don't need to have all the answers. And if a founder came to me and said there's 10 challenges and I have a solution to all of them, I'm probably not going to believe them anyway. But it's that thought, I know this is a journey. I'm in this and I'm going to solve it, because as investors, we need that individual to be willing to bang their head up against the wall or run around the wall or whatever's required to get there. Everything else is the academic component of an investment, of the financials and how it all works. But you got to kind of hook us into the future that you're building.
Yeah, love it. Josh, always a pleasure to have a chat with you, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of conversations that we have out and about at events and inside the THT Plus community. So we'll make sure the details for Utiliti are in the show notes of this episode. They're up on our website as well for people to check out and learn more and get in touch if they need. But thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks, Peter. Really enjoyed it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe, and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.